Thank you, everybody joining us today. Welcome to another weekly digital strategy chat brought to you by Denver Data Web. We are a digital strategy company. We help our clients overcome their unique challenges and achieve their objectives, all while applying a goals-focused approach to web development, web design, and digital marketing. My name is David Zonka. I'm a digital strategist here with Denver Data Web. And with me this week, we have Sarah.
I'm Sarah Joswiak. I'm the digital marketing analyst at Denver Data Web.
And also Justin.
Hi, I'm Justin Goldman. I'm the web design and developer here at Denver Data.
All right, well, thank you guys, and thank you everybody who's joined us today. If you have any questions or comments, all those joining in for the chat, please feel free to chime in with those. We love conversation, that sort of thing. But anyway, let's dive into it. We got a pretty interesting topic this week. So we're kind of delving into, I don't know, could kind of call it current events. So, there's some stuff in the news, and, for folks who are involved in marketing and advertising, if you haven't heard already, there's some pretty notable things you should probably be in tune with. And we're going to talk about those today. In particular, some changes that are happening with Google Ads and Bing Ads. So Bing is, of course, Microsoft's advertising network. And also Facebook. They're in a little bit of a tussle with Apple with some things happening with apps and, of course, the advertising that Facebook likes to do. So we're going to touch on each of those and just kind of talk about it, see what everybody thinks. What are some of the things that you should keep in mind, how it might impact you as a marketer, or even as a company who's doing advertising on one of those networks. What does that mean for your business? So pretty neat stuff. Well, why don't we kick it off with Google Ads? So Sarah, why don't you take it away from here? What is Google up to this month? And at a high level, like what should we know about it?
So over the past few years, Google has been working to improve how your keywords match with the key searches. In the past, there were kind of some not really perfected ways that keywords were matching search results. So they've been improving that over the past few years, and with that, they are doing away with the modified broad search match, which is, we've talked about it internally before. It is kind of a confusing definition of how that works. And I can kind of go over the different types of matches. There's broad, there's phrase match, there's exact match, and then there's modified broad match. Modified broad was kind of a way to fine tune kind of an in-between between broad match and phrase match. And with that, it really was kind of Google's way of making up for the fact that their searches weren't really defined very well, and that the search results really weren't finding the proper ads as a result. So with that, they have fine-tuned that the last few years, and with that, they are getting rid of the modified broad match because they have fine-tuned the phrase match to do what that match type was supposed to do all along.
Why don't I share my screen here? So here's an article from Search Engine Land. Maybe we can unpack that a little bit, because I think you did a great job explaining that, Sarah, but some of that is rather technical. So
it is.
They have a pretty good graphic here in this article, kind of breaking it down. And one of the things that really struck me in the example they gave, which I think is core to this change, is that with the broad match modified, you can identify particular keywords with a plus symbol in that basically say like, hey, it's got to be there. It's essential to the search keywords that you want to have a part of it. And what I thought was interesting in their example here, so they have moving services NYC to Boston. So the idea is that those all have to be present. And if you read it such as that, you think, all right, well, moving from New York City to Boston, that's kind of the intent here. But it's also would match if somebody searched for moving services Boston to NYC, because with a broad match, the order of the phrase is not necessarily, it's not required to be, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, Sarah, it's not required to be maintained. So, both of those versions that would match. And, if I was looking for a company that helped me move from New York City to Boston, or if I was a company that specialized in that, and that's what I was advertising for, I wouldn't want people to be getting the opposite, Boston, New York City instead, right?
Exactly. And one of the things that Google has done over the last few years is to fine tune that AI so that the AI can tell if the order is important. If it's something not as detailed to the order, like if you're looking for coffee shop, or if you're looking for shop coffee, you may get results for coffee shop, because in that way the order is not as integral to the meaning. But Google's AI has been working on fine-tuning how the order, if the order makes a difference, then it will be factored in with the new phrase match.
Mm-hmm. Well, Google, they're doing this change because, as always, they like to optimize their services to help people get better results. I admit sometimes I'm pretty cynical. I'll probably sound pretty cynical with some of these other news items that we're going to touch on. But it seems to me like this really makes sense, right? I often like going to phrase matching, and everybody's kind of got their go-to, right? Oh, I'm a phrase match guy. Oh, I'm an exact match guy, right? It's like nerd alert, right? But it's like, I like phrase match. I think it's a good mix. You got some specificity to kind of align with what you want people to be interested in, but it's not so exact that you don't miss out on other, ways that people might be, there's some allowance for synonyms on terms and keywords like that. So if it's highly related, it can still match up. I think that's great. So, I mean, I think this is probably a good move. And yeah, I mean, I've always kind of felt that, the broad match modified was really close to phrase match and how it might get utilized. I mean, you kind of see it that way?
Yeah, and the main difference with that was the order in which the words were, the order in which the keywords matched with the search terms was the main difference between those two. And then, I mean, it makes sense that it would have taken a few years for the AI to understand if the order matters or not. And now that it does, we can do away with the modified broad.
Come on, Skynet. Can you, get things in order? It's taken too long. We're going to get to Judgment Day. Can't even figure out the keywords. It's 2 years. Well, so that's pretty interesting. There was a few little tidbits there in some of the news announcements that, broad match now looking at maybe some additional signals to deliver more relevant searches, signals including landing pages and keywords in your ad group. I find it interesting. For my part, I'm not really sure what that's going to mean. I'm not sure how much signals we've gotten from Google, like what that entails, like what signals from the landing pages are going to impact how the broad match keywords are now going to factor into our ads. I'm certainly curious about that.
So broad match in general, especially if you have a long-tailed broad match search or a broad match keyword, any of those keywords that are in any of those words that are in the keyword can be searched, and your ad can let me start that over again. If you have a longer tailed keyword, let's use an example. Let's go back to our old faithful pepperoni pizza Denver. And someone does a search that only has the word Denver and not those other things, conceivably your ad may show up for that, which obviously is not very relevant. However, if your landing page talks about pepperoni pizza in Denver, and then that's also what your keyword shows, even if it's a more of a broad match search, the correlation may help it so that you're not getting those unrelated search terms to match your ads.
Mm-hmm.
I can see how that can be helpful. And, when we talk about long-term, it's long tail and, like short tail being the opposite, what we mean by that, right, is, a long tail keyword phrase might have many more words as part of that keyword phrase. It's longer in length, but I guess the idea is, there's going to be fewer searches for that. It's more specific to something, somebody might be talking about. So as opposed to Denver pizza, that would be very short tail, right?
Well, I mean, in general, using broad match for a long-tailed keyword isn't really a very good practice for that reason. It does work better with those much more short-tailed terms. But because of that, people don't always know that. And because Google has been working, as we talked about in our last chat, to make their tools a lot more easier to use so that you don't have to necessarily be an expert to use them. People may be using broad match because they're like, oh, I'll get as many searches as I can. I get as many clicks as I can, because this one opens it up more. but it's not necessarily relevant, which is not only a bad experience for the advertiser, but then also for the searcher. I mean, you may end up, I mean, not so much anymore, but you may end up with ad results that don't really match your search, and that's not helpful for that's not helpful for anyone.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good segue into our next topic, but just for anybody interested in that, that change should be rolling out for Google Ad Network anytime now. I mean, I'd say mid-February 2021 is when they're targeting that. So at the time of this recording, I would expect that to be happening imminently. So
I have one question. Like, what?
Yeah.
So what happens with the current broad match? What are they going to have to do once it is implemented? Will all those be moved over to a different match type, or is there anything that needs?
Oh, you mean the modified broad?
Yeah.
Right now they are staying the same. I think, actually, I have not found that out ultimately. I think they'll automatically either be moving to broad or to phrase. I should have looked that up beforehand, but it'll automatically be changing to one or the other.
Cool.
So you'll want to go in and make sure that you're swapping those over to phrase match.
Yeah, and like after July, whatever, after this is rolled out worldwide, you won't even have that option. So
so they're removing that option completely once it kind of rolls out too.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's cool.
So we mentioned Bing advertising, or Microsoft Ads might be the more official name for it. They the big news there is they're going to be replacing manual CPC. CPC stands for cost per click, with enhanced CPC by the end of April 2021, and these are referring to bidding strategies. So, there's manual CPC. So this is kind of considered a non-automated bidding strategy. Enhanced CPC it's kind of like a mix of manual and automated. This kind of the way I see it, Sarah, and you can probably dive into this a little bit more detail, but you have some kind of automation around it, some kind of AI incorporation to how it's doing its thing. But the big thing that I'm taking from this, just kind of like getting kind of straight to my point, is removing the capability to use manual bidding strategies. That seems pretty big to me. Let's unpack that.
Yeah, and it has marketers really worried about the amount of control that they have with their ads, which is understandable. But one thing to also note, and I don't know the exact percentage, but I know that maybe half, if not more, of people using Bing don't actually use the Bing platform. I'm sorry, Microsoft Ads don't actually use the Microsoft Ads platform as often as they use the integration from Google Ads to Microsoft Ads. You can put that on a schedule. You can do that so that they're automatically migrating your changes that you make in your Google Ads over to your Microsoft Ads. And in doing that, the Bing ads don't really, a lot of the time, get as much care or as much one-on-one attention as your Google Ads might. So because of that, they kind of lose their validity to keep up with the other ads in maybe the competitors' ad groups on Microsoft Ads. And because of that, Microsoft just isn't making as much money for their ads because you may not be meeting their keyword requirements.
For Microsoft.
So that being said, having that, well, actually, I forgot to actually talk about your first point, David, which is the difference between the manual CPC and the eCPC, which is if you are likely to be a qualified candidate for that search term, but your bid doesn't quite make it, the eCPC will kind of bump up your bid a little bit so that you do make it, so that you do have a high enough bid to make that search term. And going back to what I was saying earlier, if you're manually migrating and making it so that, okay, these bids, I'm changing the keyword bid when it goes to Microsoft, I'm changing it by 50% less. A lot of the time when that happens, especially when you're not giving the one-on-one attention to the Microsoft ads that you maybe would with your Google ads, you may not, like I said, be making the mark. So with Microsoft implementing the eCPC, it can kind of take a little more control with that. And my guess is that people are going to profit more off their Bing ads with this. Microsoft ads with this method, but it does create the illusion of them losing control, and in some respects they might. And if you do notice that you are spending more than you want to with your Microsoft ads, you can also just make sure that you're keeping your budget at a reasonable level, and Microsoft won't go over that.
I guess in some respects, it's coming down to like how much do people want to trust the machine? You know, like this is the more the kind of the cynical side of me comes out. I try and keep it bottled up, but I really can't. You know, big corporation wants people to have more of their ads get clicked on as part of their ad network. Like it's not really a feel good headline, you know.
I mean, some of the reasons behind why these things are happening are understandable. But yeah, I think on the surface, a lot of these do sound malicious, and I'm not necessarily saying that some of them are not, but I think once you dive into it and you understand the reasons behind it, then it does seem to make a little more sense why these things are happening.
You know, I you know, all that aside, I think the idea of enhanced cost per click, because Google has this too, right? You know, it's got manual. You know, I'm waiting to see if the other shoe drops. You know, got Microsoft shoe and Google shoe. Is Google going to do this next? You know, Google has been testing out the we're testing kind of like the removal of enhanced text ads, right, in favor of their responsive text ads, which we've talked about that in the past. The idea is like your standard text ads, you know, you got headlines, descriptions, and stuff. You make them. Google has this interesting tool where you can make responsive ads where you just provide, here's a bunch of headlines, here's a bunch of descriptions, here's the landing page. Make something, Google. Google uses its system to see like which combinations get the most traction and just starts showing them more often. That's actually kind of neat. I mean, I like using it for research and things like that sometimes. But again, like often I like having a lot of control because Google doesn't provide a lot of transparency into some of that I wish it did. You know, like what is the click-through rate on some of these? It shows impressions, but not the click-through rate on specific combinations. And I imagine it's because they probably don't want people to get the secret sauce. Like, all right, well, now I know which ad to use. I'll just enhance text ad. Google probably wants more control because it feels like it can use its algorithm to get more clicks happening. You know, and I feel like, you know, Microsoft is doing it kind of the same thing. Ultimately, people want clicks, but, you know, within the parameters that they're comfortable with, I would say. So I'm a little divided on it. You know, I'm not like, this isn't all bad or this is all good. I'm somewhere in the middle. I like having control where I know what I'm doing. And if I don't, or I can't manage that degree of control, yeah, I like using the automated things too. So I guess at some level, I'll see where it goes and see what's in store. Well,
Justin, do you have any questions or comments on that one?
Not that one. I think you guys hit it pretty good.
So Facebook and Apple, the grudge match of 2021, it seems. This is a really amusing story to me. So for anybody who's not in the loop, essentially Apple is making some changes in their iOS 14 operating system update that's going to make it so that apps now have to prompt you to give permission for the app to track your activity across other apps on the web. You know, I think a lot of us in this day and age probably think, yeah, all these things are tracking us, everything's tracking us. But, you know, a lot of times that stuff is in end user license agreements. You know, the EULA, the thing that people click OK, moving on, and don't even bother to read, right? It's kind of easy for you to gloss over and forget about, and you just assume, yeah, they're probably tracking my stuff. What can I do about it? Well, Apple's actually given you an opportunity, like more tools than you already have now, which you do have some in a variety of contexts, you know, like browsers and stuff like that, to actually say, look, no, I don't want the Facebook app to track my activity across other apps on the web. And all right, you know, yes or no, something like that, right? That's big. You know, I think a lot of people will probably say no. And what is the impact of that? Well, it's got Facebook worried because, you know, as much as it's like a social network, it's an advertising platform. You know, as much as like Google is a search engine, it's an advertising platform. And so with Facebook, they make tens of billions of dollars off of selling advertising space. People clicking on the ads, you know, companies are advertising on there. And it's kind of a compelling platform, right? Because you have all these tools to target. I mean, you know, if you've watched other news, you hear about Cambridge Analytica and like the election that happened and stuff. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. But there you go. It's going to have some impact one way or another, I imagine, right, Sarah?
Yeah, and it's interesting how other apps like Snapchat and Twitter is like, yeah, it's going to make a difference, and they don't seem all that concerned, which is interesting that Facebook is so concerned about it. And I mean, it's obviously I know that Facebook and Instagram have quite a bit more traffic than Snapchat and Twitter, and they do make quite a bit more money on those ads. But what you mentioned yesterday, it's interesting how they're making the argument. They're saying, well, this is going to damage small businesses. Small businesses use our ad platform to bring in their targeted traffic. And while that is true, it's interesting that Facebook is using only that argument to make their claim.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side of that, and I mean, there's so much to unpack with this, but on the other side of that one, and we were talking about this yesterday, and Justin and I actually both agreed on this, and David kind of made fun of us. I would rather have targeted ads, and I understand that, like, yes, it's tracking me, yes, it's looking at what I'm doing. But I mean, a perfect example, I was looking for skincare products the other day and I wanted to buy them, and I was going to the website and I was browsing it, and I went to Facebook and there was a coupon code waiting for me for the exact skincare product I was about to buy. And I was like, okay, great. I was going to buy it anyway, but now I'm definitely going to buy it because I get it for cheaper. So it's interesting how that works. So it does, like, kind of bring about the question, like, it doesn't mean that your Facebook isn't going to have any ads. You're still going to have ads, and you're probably going to have a lot of them or just as many, but they just won't be targeted. So it's yet another thing where we can see both sides of it. And I think it's pretty easy to see both sides of it. But I am kind of interested in, like, how the two of you feel about that, because I'm very two-sided, but I'm also kind of, as much as I hate to admit this, I am kind of siding with, I do want the targeted ads for those reasons.
Well, I've already opted out of most things like that. So that's actually made so, like, I can do a lot of my work better. So, like, I'm not polluting my own data on things. I'm constantly going to things and checking stuff. So it just makes it easier for me. I put in plugins, extensions, and other rules or other stuff. Hey, don't send data, whatever. I don't want to show up in analytics and things as I'm doing my own testing. But from the advertiser side, I like ignore the fact about whatever I might think of, actually spending time on the Facebook platform. A lot of people do and they enjoy it. That's great. The ability to target people for advertisements, based on demographics or things that the platform knows, some of their behavior and stuff. I certainly approach what I do is, I know that there's ways that I can help people to do what they're trying to do, probably more from the B2B standpoint, business to business. And so I kind of see it as my duty, if it's possible, I can help them achieve their goals. I have a duty and responsibility myself to try and make them aware of how I can help them so that they can achieve what they're trying to do. I know it sounds a little cheesy, but I really believe that. And so, the kind of a loss of targeting capabilities means it's, to some extent, it's going to be a little bit more of our shotgun approach. And there's inefficiency with that. I don't think people will stop advertising. I think, will people advertise as much on Facebook? Perhaps not. I mean, if they can, find a more targeted and efficient way to do it elsewhere, they might explore that. It might not be immediate. And of course, iOS isn't everything. There's more Android phones out there than iPhones. So it's just a piece of the pie. But I imagine it's gonna make people start wondering, like, should we put as much budget to this targeted, cold targeting on Facebook kind of stuff? That's kind of where I sit on it.
Yeah. Justin, you were nodding earlier. What are your thoughts?
Like we talked about yesterday, I really do think that, there are some people out there that just do not want to be tracked at all. They install these ad blocker plugins and stuff like that to completely ignore the ads and stuff. So I think there's two ends of the spectrum where, some people are going to love this change and then some people are not going to really mind it. So, but I do think that, I do think it's going to be for better in some ways. Just giving people control over their data. I don't think it's a bad thing, but how they approach that and give that choice to the user and how they explain that to the user, and what I think it's going to be up to the developer of the app to give the user a good enough explanation of how they're using their data so that they want to opt in and allow them to use their data.
Yeah. It's cool. We have a comment from a viewer. Do we want to read that?
Yeah, Alan was mentioning that Google paid mapping positions exist now, so they've been working on adding impressions column for their rank reports. It's one of the things I do like about Google is we're even just using that this morning. Trying to dive into how certain ads are performing and why. What's kind of the nuanced information that we can get out of that. There's a lot of tools there, so I do appreciate how Google has this vast amount of data that you can kind of comb through. They don't necessarily always make it immediately visible, and I suppose that kind of goes with that trend you mentioned earlier, Sarah, about trying to make it easier for users. I definitely recognize that over time with some of the tools that they add, make it easier for people who don't necessarily understand how all the nuts and bolts fit together to make the things work and get in and start advertising. That's great. But yeah, the reports, as you get kind of that more advanced level, you can start to dive into, all right, so this ad seems to be more successful than this other one. Let's dive into that. Let's figure out, what about it? What are the keywords that people are searching that hit for that ad that gets the really high click-through rate, and then you can start emphasizing those things. So yeah, I really like that about Google, at least.
Well, yeah, and I think the maps thing is really interesting.
I actually haven't heard of that yet, so I'm gonna have to do some research on the paid maps.
Yeah, same. I mean, there are paid map ads right now. However, it's really cool that we can kind of have more control over that. I didn't know that either, so that's really cool. I'll have to look into that more.
Yep.
So thank you.
All right, well, we covered a lot today. Definitely some really interesting topics out there in the news. Definitely want to stay in on that. And we're going to continue to talk about topics like that over time. Sometimes we cover very specific technical ways to solve an advertising or a marketing problem or a web development issue. And sometimes like what's going on in the world? How are things shifting in the online and digital landscape? So be sure to continue to stay connected with our digital strategy chat every week on Fridays. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can be notified of each new event as we get them on there. Also, look for us on our website to get additional resources on the topics we cover. We're at denverdata.com, and you'll also find us on Facebook and LinkedIn. Thank you so much for everybody joining us today, and we'll